We are so glad that you are with us. If you weren't with us last week we started talking about the fact that our life is just a collection of the decisions we make. And that decisions we tend to think of as just being solitary events, but they really aren't solitary events, that our decisions wind up putting us on a road to a predictable outcome. And the interesting thing is when you start to meet people like this semester, the small group that I'm a part of is largely people that I didn't know very well in some aspects. And so it's been fun for me to get to know them and to hear their story. And one of the things I love, when you just meet some people and you begin to hear their story, is that as they're telling you their story, what you're hearing is a series of decisions they've made. And generally they'll talk about something, and there's generally some fork in the road kind of decisions, and they can see it sort of standing back from it, and you can see it and you go, oh wow, that was a huge decision. But the interesting thing is often when we're right in the middle of those big decisions that we look back at later that took us down a road that was good or bad, in the moment they don't always appear to be that big a decision for us. But most of us can stand back, and as we look at our life, we can say, wow, that was a big deal. I'm so glad I went on that date. I'm so glad I didn't go on that date. I'm so glad I went to that college. I'm so glad that I got that degree. I'm so glad that I went through with that job. I'm glad I got out of that job. And we can see that it took us on a road to a place that wound up being good. And on the opposite side of us, most of us can also look at things and go, boy, I didn't think that was that big a deal. But it wound up taking me down a road that led to some really bad things in my life. That decision turned out to be huge. So in this series, we're talking about the fact that our decisions wind up leading us to be a hot mess in some cases, and that the idea is that our decisions put us on a road to a predictable outcome, and that our decisions, they wind up being not just solitary events, but they lead to something. And the truth is, all of us could see that when we look at our kids' lives, or we look at something and we say, man, you just have no idea how big that decision is. They're making it just in the moment, but we can see it's huge. Now, this series, we're talking to each other and sort of coaching each other through these decisions, and really this whole series is based on a couple of premises. We said last week, number one is that you and I are one decision away from being stupid. That is that I'm one moment, one decision away from doing something that other people in my life will look back and go, wow, that's where you became a hot mess. That's where you made that one decision. We're all one moment away from making a stupid decision. And the second premise is a little one that most of us don't really think about, but it really works its way into spiritual people, religious people like those that would join in to something like that, and it's this. The fact that God loves me and will forgive me does not always put my life in a place where it can be blessed by God. That there's a difference between loved by God and being forgiven by God and my life being blessed by God. Now, many of us think that because God loves me and because God will forgive any dumb decision that I make, and He will, that because God will give me a second chance and He's got a second chance, is that somehow that God will cancel His love and His forgiveness will cancel the consequences of my dumb decisions in life. But the truth is, even though God loves me, and even though God will forgive me, and eternally there are no consequences for my sins, God has put a principle at work in this world that our decisions lead to consequences for us. It's said this way in the Bible. We talked about this last week. It says, don't be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man, a woman, a person will reap what they sow. God always loves us. God will always forgive us if we're willing to turn around and come back to Him and turn toward Him. God will always give us a second chance. But God's love and God's forgiveness does not cancel the consequences of the decisions that we make. We reap what we sow. So in this series, instead of just living with the fact that we're hot messes, we want to talk about how do I put myself in a place where I can be loved by God, forgiven by God, and that my life will be in a place to be blessed by God. So we're talking about how to make better decisions, we're talking about the ways most of the time we get it wrong. We're looking at those, and we're trying to help each other learn how to deal with those things and get it right more often. And today, what I want to do in the second week of this is not just talk to you about the predictable outcomes anymore. Today, I want to give you a question to ask yourself when you're in the middle of a decision. It's a question that can help us all as we're at a place of trying to decide what's the right road to go down. This is a question that when I say it to you, you're probably going to think to yourself, wow, that's not very profound, but it's a question that on the surface, even though it seems simple, this question, if you will genuinely ask it to yourself, this is a question that's a little bit threatening. And because it's a little bit threatening, it's a question that most of us don't ever ask ourselves or ever get to the real answer. Here's the question. Am I being honest with myself about this decision? Am I being completely honest with myself? Another way of thinking about it is, what's the real reason I want to do this? Am I being completely honest with myself? Really? What's the real reason that I want to do this? Am I being honest with myself? Now, let me talk to you for just a moment about you. And the reason I can talk to you about you is because you and I are alike. And when I talk about you, I'm actually talking about me. We have so many things in common. Here's what normally happens with you and I when we begin to make a decision is I sort of make a decision. I'm looking at two options, and I sort of have a way that I sort of think I want to go. It's the way either that's easiest or it's the way that I think will make me happiest. The way I go, and it's not necessarily whether it's better or right. That's not the way most of us are on a truth quest for what's true. Most of us are in this place, and I sort of settle on a sort of way, and then I say to myself, now what are reasons that I would go about doing that? Why are the reasons what I do about it? I mean, here's what I know about you and me. You are an expert at selling yourself on what you want to do. You may not be able to sell anybody else on anything else, but you are an expert at selling you on doing what you want to do. I mean, think of all the goofy things that you have talked yourself into purchasing, all the goofy reasons that you gave yourself for buying the things that you wound up buying. I mean, here's one that I relate to so well. Think about how easy it is for me, think about how easy it is to talk yourself out of exercising and into dessert. I mean, think about all the times that you, in your right mind, have sat down and you think, you know what, I know I need to get healthy, I know I need to exercise more, I know I need to eat better, and you actually plan it out. You set a time you're going to go walking, you set a time that you're going to go to the gym, you may even pay for a gym membership or pay for a trainer. You set a time that you're going to do it, and as the time gets closer, you begin to talk you out of doing it. You begin to say to yourself, well, I need to really work a little bit late tonight, and I went to the gym yesterday, and I'm feeling a little pain from that. My back hurts a little bit, and I'm going to go probably tomorrow anyway, and it'll give my ankle a chance to heal. You sit there, and you think up reasons to talk you out of doing what you had decided to do that would be good for you, and you talk yourself into it, and the person that gets hurt is you. I tell you about, this is how it goes for me. This is how I talk myself when I'm at somebody's house into eating things that I've already eaten enough and they've made dessert, and I talk myself into eating more calories than I'll ever need. I say things to myself like, well, she worked so hard on making it, and I just don't want to disappoint her. I mean, I know she worked really hard on it, and I don't want to disappoint her, and I don't want to hurt her feelings. I don't want to just say, you know what, I want some of that sugar. I'm going to eat it. So what I say to myself is, I just don't want to hurt her feelings. I deceive myself. I mean, all of us have done that kind of thing. I mean, we're at somebody's house and we talk ourselves into doing something we really don't want to do. We say a reason that we're doing it, but the honest truth is we just want to do it, which means I'm not being completely honest with myself. See, here's the way it works. It's as if when I'm confronted with two options, like I said earlier, I sort of settle on which one ever my heart is sort of drawn toward. This is the one that sort of makes me feel better. This is the one that makes me a little bit happier. This is the one that's a little bit easier. This is the one I want, or this is the one my friends are doing. And so I've already sort of settled on that. My heart sort of tells me that's what I want to do. And then my heart says to my brain, hey, brain, go find me some reasons why it would make sense to do that. My heart sort of says to my head, okay, go out and look for that. And the brain comes back to you and says, hey, She already made it. You don't want to hurt her feelings. And I go, oh, that's a good one. That is a good reason. I do not want to be a person that hurts her feelings, so I'll eat it. What's another reason? What else you got? And the brain will say, well, you haven't had dessert for a couple of days. And I go, yeah, there's another good one, so I'm going to eat it. And then it gets really crazy in that you and I start believing the made-up reasons that we made up. The really crazy idea is you and I start believing them and defending the reasons we gave ourselves for bad decisions. And the reason I know this is true is because if this weren't true, you'd all be wealthier and I'd be thinner. I mean, we'd all be wealthier and we'd all be healthier if it weren't for the fact, the reason we're not, the reason you don't have more money, the reason I'm not skinnier, the reason that we don't eat and manage our money the way we should is because you talked yourself out of it. You decided you wouldn't. I decided that I'd eat it. You decided you'd spend it. We talked ourselves out of doing the thing we knew was the right thing to do. But our heart sent our brain out to find some answers. We made up some reasons why we wanted to do it. And then we believed our own answers and we made the bad decision. So we have to ask ourselves, am I being honest with myself? Am I being completely honest with myself? And the reason we don't ask this question very well is because it's a pretty uncomfortable question. I don't want to just say, you know what, the real reason I'm eating that is because I lack self-control and I like to eat. We don't like to say that, so I make up an answer. The reason we don't ask this is because it's really, really uncomfortable. But if I want to keep my life from being a hot mess and to get better at making decisions that will lead toward me not just being loved by God, but being blessed by God, I have to get better at answering to myself. Am I being honest with myself? Am I being completely honest with myself? Really? Am I telling myself the truth? Now, there's another part of this that really complicates this, and I'm not meaning to offend you, but the other thing that makes it complicated is you got something wrong with you, and I do too. And there's this thing in us that the truth is it doesn't look like we have very much control of, but we can at least know that it exists, and most of us just ignore that it's the truth. There's this thing in us that's wrong with us. And to explain what it is that's wrong about us, I want to take you to a famous part of the Bible. In fact, it's one of my most famous, it's one of my favorite verses in the Bible. I quote it a lot to myself and to other people. It's in the older part of the Bible, and it's written by a guy named Jeremiah. Now, Jeremiah is a prophet. And all a prophet is somebody who speaks for God. And he's speaking for God at a time about 600 years before Jesus is born. And in Jeremiah's time, he's at a place where God is judging, God is trying to discipline his people, the nation of Israel. Now, if you don't know all of that, God has this special relationship with the nation of Israel. They're the one through which he's going to work his plan for the whole world. And we've talked about that before, but he's chosen them specially. And he says to them, if you will do what I say, I will lead you, I'll direct you, you'll have wise decisions, and you'll put yourself in a place as a nation that I will bless you. But if you don't listen to me, if you decide to do what you want to do, then I will still have a relationship with you, but you will suffer the consequences. I will not bless you, and you will suffer the consequences because your decisions put you on a road to that predictable outcome. Well, for hundreds of years now, the nation of Israel has been turned against God. They've been doing what they want to do, and they're at a place where God is allowing judgment on their decisions. He's allowing the consequences to come on them. And Jeremiah is speaking for him, and he's telling the people, look, all that you're suffering, it's all coming from God. And the way that God winds up bringing judgment is there's this man who's a king in Babylon. His name is Nebuchadnezzar. You might have heard of him because, in the last decade or so, we dealt with a guy named Saddam Hussein, and Saddam Hussein's hero was Nebuchadnezzar because Iraq and Iran and that whole area was originally part of Babylon. And Nebuchadnezzar basically became the ruler of the world for a while, and that was Saddam Hussein's hero. So Nebuchadnezzar is going to go conquer the world from Iraq to Iran to that whole area, and he's going to go down and capture Egypt, which is a good ways down. And when he goes down to capture them, he comes through this little country of Israel, and just on his way, he conquers them and takes a bunch of the people back captive. But before he goes back home, he takes one guy from Israel, his name is Jehoiakim, and he appoints him to be king over Israel. But what he says to him is, now, Jehoiakim, you and I both know you really aren't king. I'm the king. I'm the guy in charge. But I'm going to let you have the people of Israel think you're the king. But you need to remember, I'm the king. So you do whatever you want here. You get whatever you want. Be as rich as you want. Push the people as hard you want to. But you send to me the taxes I tell you to send. Don't start any rebellions because you're not really the king. I'm the king. Don't make me come down here. So Jehoiakim, he gets on this track. And Jeremiah the whole time is saying to him, this whole thing with Nebuchadnezzar, this is really a good idea because God's bringing judgment through Nebuchadnezzar. And so don't push against him, this whole thing with the taxes. Just go ahead and send it. The people are experiencing the consequences of living outside of God's blessing. And if we'll just get them to turn their hearts back to God, God will deliver us in due time. But over time, Jehoiakim just can't stand it. I mean, he has happened to him what everybody in power has happened to them, and he begins to think he can turn everything around, make their country great again, all that kind of stuff. And so he decides he's not going to send the taxes. He's going to raise an army, and he's going to stand against Nebuchadnezzar. And Nebuchadnezzar comes down there, and he kills Jehoiakim, and he takes the country back. And the whole time, Jeremiah's been telling Jehoiakim not to do it, and he watched the whole thing takes place. And Nebuchadnezzar destroys everything, kills a bunch of people, kills Jehoiakim, his whole family. And before he leaves and goes back to Babylon, he takes another guy, a guy named Zedekiah, and he says to him, now, Zedekiah, I'm going to let you be king. Your whole family can live in the palace, but you need to remember, I'm the king. Don't get to thinking that you have any power. Just do what I tell you. Send the taxes back to me. You can get as rich as you want to with whatever's left over. Put as much pressure on the people as you want to. I do not care about that. But do not begin to think that you can rebel against me. Well, Jeremiah's there with Zedekiah, and he keeps telling him, this is a good idea. God is in this thing. This isn't about who's king. This is about the fact that God is allowing us to suffer the consequences. So help me, Zedekiah. Turn the people's heart back to God, and in due time, God will relent, and God will bless us again. But over time, power speaks to Zedekiah, and he decides that their real problem is that they don't have enough power themselves. They need to make a treaty with Egypt. Egypt's also been conquered, and they think if they can get Egypt and Israel together, they'll rally an army together and they'll stand up to Nebuchadnezzar. And so he signs a treaty, and the whole time Jeremiah's going, it's not about who our ally is. This is about God. God's allowing us to suffer the consequences of this. We need to turn back to God. We need to allow God to bless him. And Nebuchadnezzar gets wind of the whole thing. He comes down there. He crushes both Egypt and Israel again. He kills all of Zedekiah's family in front of him. And as he's killing Zedekiah's last child, as the child dies, he puts out Zedekiah's eyes, and he doesn't kill Zedekiah. He allows him to live blind with the memory that he cost his family his life. He lets him live in prison the whole time. Now, during all this time that Jeremiah is trying to work with these kings who are making these decisions that he can just see are so stupid, and they're just blowing up their country and making things worse, as he's trying to speak to God for them, in the middle of this, he describes something that is true about these kings, but it's true about you, and it's true about me. It's just true about human beings. He makes this huge statement about the nature of human beings and the way that we wind up operating. He says something about the human heart that I go back to again and again, and why you and I have a hard time with this question, am I being honest with myself? Here's what he says. Jeremiah 17:9. The heart is deceitful above all things and beyond cure. My heart, your sweet mama's heart, your little grandbaby's heart, your beautiful little child you hold in your arms' heart, is deceitful above all things. That is, your heart, my heart, is deceitful. Every person's heart we know, it's deceitful. And then there's the next part, he says, and it's beyond cure. You know what that means? That means you're never going to educate yourself out of this. That means that you are never going to mature yourself out of this. That means that you're never going to get so spiritual. You're never going to get so close to Jesus. You're never going to pray yourself out of this. This means you're never going to go to church enough or get to a place where this will not be true about this. For the rest of your life, you're going to have to understand this is true about you. The heart is deceitful above all things and beyond cure. My heart, your heart is permanently damaged. All of our hearts is the same way. Now, here is why this is so vitally important. Every time you and I make a decision, every time I have a choice, and I'm about to make a choice about this thing, I carry around in me this potential because my heart is deceitful. And the potential I carry around in me is I have the potential to deceive myself. And you'll notice in this that he uses the word that the heart is deceitful. He didn't say the heart was dishonest, because there's a word for dishonest that he could have picked. He said the heart is deceitful. And they're two different things. See, you've been around people that are dishonest, and after you're around them for a while, you sort of smell it. You can sort of get, boy, they just don't tell the truth. And you make a decision about the fact that here's this person, they're a liar. They can't own the truth. They can't live in the truth. They can't tell the truth. And you decide, I'm not going to trust them because they're so dishonest. But deceit and dishonesty aren't the same thing. Deceit is, at the root, it means it takes a little bit of the truth, it takes enough of the truth, and it takes enough of the falsehood. It takes enough of the truth so that it's believable, and it takes enough of a lie that it ruins everything. It takes enough of the truth and enough of a lie that it can manipulate me into doing the wrong thing. That's what he says my heart and your heart is like. That my heart and your heart doesn't outright lie to us. It takes enough of the truth and enough of a lie, and it deceives us into doing the thing that will wind up as destroying us and turning our life into a heart mess. Your heart, as wonderful a person as you are, your heart is deceitful above all things. Now, if that wasn't enough, this is how he ends the verse. Your heart is deceitful above all things, beyond cure. Who can understand it? And in his context, he's just looking down at kings, sort of like you wind up looking at people around you who are in charge, and he looks at them and goes, how could you not see that these decisions were bad? I mean, how could you not see what was going to happen? How would you decide that to lead us into this so you destroy our country? He stands back and goes, why would your heart do that to you and ultimately to us? Who can understand that? That's why you look back at some purchases that now you owe debt on that you wish you hadn't made, and you go, what was I thinking? Why would I do that? Or it's why you've gone back to some relationships that you stayed in way too long, and there was really no reason. And you just go, what was I doing? How could I be so stupid? Why would I allow that to happen to me? Jeremiah said hey, welcome to the world of the human heart. Because my heart and your heart and everybody's heart, our hearts are deceitful. And if they are left unchecked, if we don't live with the truth of that, if we don't own the truth of that, if I don't know that that my heart will deceive me, I have to buffer that by saying to myself, okay, Ed, I know what you're about to do. Are you being honest with yourself? Am I telling myself the truth? Why am I wanting to do this really? Am I being completely honest with me? If I don't force myself to ask that question, if I just go about it, if I just live out of what seems best to me in the moment, my heart will deceive me. This is what we carry around with us every single day, and it has the potential to affect every decision in our life and wreck our lives and turn us into hot messes. And how does it work? Well, it's sort of like we already talked about. Our heart gets emotionally wrapped around something. It's either through a person or because it's the easiest choice or it's the path of least resistance. It's what all of our friends are doing. It gets wrapped around it. And then we send our brain out to find a whole bunch of reasons of why it makes sense for me to do what I've already decided to do. We say to our brain, hey, what's the reason I want to do that? That's why when I'll do something stupid, people say, Ed, why did you do that? And I'll start spitting out my stupid reasons for doing it. And then everybody knows it doesn't make any sense. And of course, you've seen this. You've seen it in your kids. It's why if you ever spend any time as a parent and you wind up arguing with your teenagers over stuff, and you can see stuff, because what they is you were 13 once. You were 16 once. You were 18. You were 21 once. And you say to them, now why is it you're doing this? And they start telling you their reasons, and inside you're thinking to yourself, that's not the real reason. Come on. That's not the real reason. You can see it so clearly in them that they are deceiving themselves. But our heart deceives us, and we can't see it. When it's in us, we believe the deceit because our heart is deceitful among all things and beyond cure, and no one can understand it. So there you go. Let's say a prayer and take an offering and go home. I mean, right? I mean, that's so depressing. But it's true, isn't it? I mean, there aren't many of you sitting here and going, I don't know what he's talking about. I've never seen that in myself or anybody else. Because all of us are good at making decisions based on happy and easy and my friends. Happy and easy and what other people want. That's why this question's so important. Why am I doing this? What's the real reason I'm doing this? Am I being completely honest with myself? Really? Is that the real reason? Really? If you'll ask yourself this question, here's what you'll find out. That question is both liberating and terrifying at the same time. It's liberating because if you will tell yourself the truth, then like you've heard, the truth will indeed set you free. And it's important. I mean, it's an important kind of thing to get to the place you can tell yourself the truth. Now, let's be real clear. I'm not saying that you have to go out and you have to tell other people why you're doing it. That's something else, and it's a good thing, and we need to talk about that at some point. But that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm not talking about you figuring out what the truth is and then you go telling everybody why you did it. Don't jump ahead and say, well, if I wind up telling myself the truth, then I'm going to have to go admit this to a whole bunch of people. Nope. That is not what I'm saying here. I'm not saying. This is so liberating because if I can get to the place that I can tell myself the truth, I can break the back of deceit in my life. And here's what the truth is. When I allow a lie to live in me, the lie grows. And when I keep quiet about it, it gains more power in my life. But when I can get to the point where I can expose the lie, when I can say the lie out loud, the lie begins to lose its power over my life. It's so liberating because when I can answer for myself, is this the real reason? What's the real reason I want to do this? Am I being honest with myself? The lie that I tell myself that I created to already do what I had decided to do, even though it might not be good for me, that lie loses power in my life. So the reason to be brutally honest with myself is it liberates me from the power of the lie. And when I can admit the lie begins to shrink in my life. But it's terrifying because once I admit it, I'm now accountable to me. Now I know the truth. Now I have to say, the reason I'm choosing to move, the reason I'm choosing to sell our house and move into a bigger house is not because we need a bigger house so we can be more generous and have homeless people come live with us. I mean, we already have 2,400 square feet. The real reason I'm moving is because, well, I can afford it, and I want people to know that I can afford it, and people know that I have money, and I feel like I ought to live in a bigger house. And so the real reason I'm doing it is because, well, it's what I want people to think about me. I'm a little insecure about what people think about me. Well, that's terrifying. That's pretty honest. The reason you do things, the reason I do things is, the real reason I did it is because I was afraid. The real reason is I reacted out of fear. But I don't say that up front. I invent another reason that I can spew out to make myself not feel afraid. Or the reason is because I'm just lonely. The reason I stay with him even though he isn't good for me is because I'm lonely, or because I feel ugly, or because I don't think that I'll get anybody else. The reason is because I feel left out and I feel alone and I don't like feeling alone, and so that's the real reason. See, now you're getting somewhere. Now I'm getting to the truth. But it's terrifying because you see yourself in a new way. And now I begin to deal with the truth in my life. But when I begin to see myself right, when I begin to admit the truth about me, here's the awesome thing. I become a candidate for the grace of God to be at work in my life. And I'm not only loved by God and forgiven by God, but when I admit the truth about me and I don't lie to me, I can begin to live out the words that you've heard so long quoted that you didn't even know Jesus said them. Then I will know the truth, and the truth will set me free. The truth indeed will set you free. But it's a very difficult place because first, the truth often makes us terribly, terribly uncomfortable. When I see myself for the truth, it becomes liberating to me. It's terrifying to me because I have to see myself. But it will put me in a place where God's grace can be at work in my life. Now, here's what I think you should do about what I just talked about. And this gets us to next steps. If you haven't already done it, would you go ahead and take one of these cards? They're on a chair nearby, and you just put your name in a way that we can contact you on it. And we're not just doing this if you're here for the first time just for you. We do this every week because we don't believe anybody's here by accident. We don't believe you heard this message by accident. We believe God had you here for a reason. And not only do we want to pray for you, and we do that if you put this in the offering in just a few moments, but on the back of it, we have a place for next steps because we think you should consider taking a next step. And so today, I want to talk about there's really only one next step that I want to encourage you to take on this. And so if you just flip that over, I want to talk to you about that next step. And I want to talk to you about a way to do this. And I'm just going to say up front, you don't have to do this. I mean, it's not like we're going to hold an exam at the door, and if you don't do this, we're not going to let you back in. You don't have to do this, and it's not some kind of command. But what I think you ought to do with about telling yourself the truth is, here's what I think you need to do. I think you need to have a heart-to-heart with yourself in front of a mirror, and you need to do it out loud. Isn't that goofy? I think you need to get alone in front of a mirror, so you need to sit in your car and readjust the mirror and look at you, or you need to get in a bathroom, you need to lock the door when nobody else is at home, and you need to say this out loud. And the reason I think you need to have the conversation out loud is because our minds move so fast, but when I talk out loud, it makes me slow down. And there is something really healthy and powerful about me hearing me say the truth about me. The real reason is not because I don't want to hurt her feelings. That's not the real reason. The real reason is not because we need a basement or we need more room. The real reason that I'm giving up this car is not because it doesn't get good enough gas mileage. You need to look in a mirror, you need to look in your own eyes, you need to say out loud, you need to answer the question, am I being honest with myself about what I'm about to do? You need to tell yourself the truth so that you don't wind up allowing your heart to deceive you. You will always have the capacity to deceive yourself. But once you know it and you admit it and you live with that truth, you can begin to choose to tell yourself the truth. Are you being completely honest with yourself? I mean, when you hear yourself begin to convince your mom or convince your dad, or you begin to tell your spouse why you're doing something, or you convince the people at work why you did the thing you do, and you hear the words beginning to come out of your mouth, once you begin to do this for a while, you begin to hear something inside of you go, come on. Is that the real reason? I mean, I know what you're telling them. That's okay. You don't have to go tell them. I'm not saying that you have to tell yourself the truth. What's the real reason you got a divorce? I'm not saying that you have to go back and tell your ex-spouse. I'm not saying you have to tell your kids. You just need to be honest with you. What is the real reason? I mean, when I think about the conversations that I've had with people over time and trying to help them, the things that they need to say to themselves, the real reason I'm buying this, the real reason I'm moving my family, the real reason that I'm going to put my kid in this sport is not because of them. The real reason The real reason I'm doing this. I'm not saying you have to tell anybody else. You just need to stop lying to you. And when you admit it to yourself, it will lose some of its power. You can stop deceiving yourself. The real reason we're moving in together. Well, we're moving in together because it's cheaper for us to live as one. Oh, okay, that's the real reason? So I guess if you met a guy who was rich and he'd let you live with him for free, but he was ugly, you'd move in with him because it's better financially, right? The real reason. What's the real reason you're moving in together? Because in a few months, a few years, when you break up and you move out and people say to you, hey, why aren't y'all living together? They go, well, there were other issues. Really? The real reason I'm doing it. The real reason. I mean, you've been lying to yourself the whole time. What's the real reason? And here's the thing. Once you admit it to yourself, if you decide somewhere along the road to admit it to people who already love you and you say, hey, the real reason I did that, you know what you'll probably hear them say is, yeah, I know. I love you. Doesn't matter. I knew that was it. See, because they can see you're lying to you. Because we can see the truth in other people. But our heart has the power to cause us to deceive ourselves. Will you have the courage? Will you look at yourself in the eye and tell yourself out loud, I know that's goofy, but will you tell yourself the truth? The real reason I want to do this, and don't tell yourself all the reasons you're telling everybody else, the real reason I'm considering something that everybody else tells me not to do is. And the reason you do this is because our lives are just a collection of the decisions we make and then the consequences, because every decision puts us on a road to a predictable outcome. And your decisions can either put you in a position where you'll be loved by God and forgiven by God, but not blessed by God. Or you can put yourself in a position of predictable outcome of loved by God, forgiven by God, and blessed by God. Why am I doing this really? Am I telling myself the truth? Really? Is your heart deceiving you? Are you being completely honest with yourself? If you'll bow, I'll pray for you. Father, I'm so thankful for people that have joined in today, for the time they've taken to be a part of this. Now, God, give us the courage to do what we are the only people. We can only do this for ourselves. Help us to be completely honest with ourselves. Thank you for revealing the truth that somewhere inside of us we already knew, that our hearts are deceitful. They deceive us. Help us to tell ourselves the truth and to live out the truth of what Jesus said, that when we know the truth will set us free. Thank you for grace that comes to us in Jesus. In His name I pray. Amen.